Hello and welcome to Dialogue. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is making his first official visit to China since taking office last May, and the timing couldn't be more significant. The European Union is debating its own industrial policy, with Made in Europe gaining traction. Transatlantic tensions are simmering, and Germany's economy is searching for new momentum in an increasingly uncertain global landscape. Merz arrives with a strong delegation of business leaders, a clear signal that economic ties still matter. But beyond trade and investment, bigger political questions loom. How will Beijing and Berlin manage both cooperation and competition, especially in industrial manufacturing? Can China and Germany recalibrate their partnership amid shifting global dynamics? And what does this visit really mean, not just for Berlin and Beijing, but for Europe as a whole? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me today are Zhou Bo, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy of Tsinghua University; Moritz Eichhorn, Editor-in-Chief of Ostdeutsch Medien Holding; Hu Chunchun, Associate Professor and Executive Director of the Institute for European Studies at the Shanghai International Studies University; and Ulrich Bruckner, Professor of Political Science at Stanford University in Berlin. Welcome to the show. Professor Hu Chunchun, I will start with you. This is Chancellor Merz's first visit to China since taking office less than 9 months ago. What do you make of his visit? What's on top of his agenda?
Yes, it is the first visit of Friedrich Merz as the Federal Chancellor of Germany to China. I think he has a very complicated agenda, both in terms of economical ties with China, between Germany and China, but also in terms of political issues. So it is not a very easy task for him.
Mm-hmm. No easy task. Zhou Bo, Chunchun used the word like complicated, agenda or relationship. What do you say? What's your understanding of his, purpose for, visiting Beijing, and what does he intend to achieve?
Well, I certainly agree to what the first speaker said. I think his position is a bit like being sandwiched, by domestic pressure and by his good wish to promote, first of all, trade relationship with China. So if you look at the major countries in Europe, actually none of them would look in very good shape because the transatlantic relationship certainly has gone sour. And as Merz said at the Munich Security Conference, the international order based on rule is basically over. Of course, it's debatable as to whether the order has been over or not. Because this is if you talk about this being liberal international order, I think that is more or less over, right? But now I believe his main purpose of being here in China is to seek business opportunities. Because Germany relies so heavily on export, for example, cars, good cars to China. It once occupied 1/3 of the whole export, so it matters tremendous for them.
Mm-hmm. Moritz, I'm not sure whether you can hear me now. Share with us your understanding. What's the public expectation inside Germany of the visit here?
I think it has been aptly described as a balancing act because the Chancellor, while at the Munich Security Conference 2 weeks ago, has already sent a message as to the moral posture of his government towards foreign relations and China in particular. I don't know if you recall, but with the former Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, we had somebody who went around the world lecturing people, the Chinese as well. And Merz has signaled that is over. We will have no more moral grandstanding. And the reason for that as well is obviously what the colleagues have just mentioned is stagnant growth in Europe. We need China as an export market and the trade relations as a whole. And because there are a lot of German companies who cannot create growth in Germany anymore, but are heavily invested in China.
Heavily investing in China. That's part of the complicated relationship, I guess. Some of the German company, if you look at investment, actually it reached a new high in 2025 from Germany in China.
Yes.
But at the same time, China again became the largest trading partner of Germany. But at the same time, the German side would complain the gap, let's say, the trade deficit, they say, is increasing, is widening. That's the concern. Is there anything China can do or the German side can do to sort of like adjusting the trade to reach a balanced trade? Probably, I don't know, like to which point you can call it a balanced trade relationship. But anyway, is there any way we can probably allay reduce the concern of the German side?
So I wish I had a answer to this very complete question, but it's very challenging. As you know, is in the German discussions, the German deficit in trading with China is now a big issue. So they, from a German perspective, do want to rebalance this relationship, but as you know, as Mr. Zhou Bo said just now, the relationship is not only a economic one, but also a result of the changing international political and economic order. So we cannot only speak of the rebalancing of economic relationship. We have to think about the surroundings of the international order. So it's very challenging.
Right. Share with us more on that respect. The background. Of course, relationship with the U.S. is, I guess there are tensions. Let's say, if not in trouble. Obviously, their relationship with Russia has been, let's say, bad for at least 4 years, and then with China, if you look at the official official words of describing their relationship with China, they call China as not only a partner but also systematic rival, a competitor.
Yes.
Under such a background, like, how can we understand this rebalancing here?
Well. It's a huge difference in terms of economic cooperation or trading between the two countries, and in terms of the political relationship, because there was a not so positive development in the last years to ideologically see this relationship between Germany and China. So the aspect of rivalry has overwhelmed a little bit. But as you said, now Chancellor Friedrich Merz has taken office for almost 1 year. So he has to rebalance the interest of the two sectors, the interest of the economy, interest of the politics. It's not very easy for him because, as you know, Germany or Friedrich Merz, he is a person of the so-called Transatlantic tradition. So here, how can he position himself, but also the German politics towards the U.S. and at the same time toward China is very challenging.
So, Moritz, in that respect, transatlantic, the same time relationship with China, economically, geopolitically. So, what do you think the Chancellor tries to achieve during his China visit?
I think the focus this time around is definitely on the economic issues. If you look at the delegation that he is bringing with him, you see a lot of business leaders and very few people from NGOs or other sort of civic society factions. This is reminiscent of the Merkel years, where it would always just be CEOs from DAX companies coming with the chancellor to China to strike business deals. And to the transatlanticists, I mean, it kind of makes sense if you are to become the leader of one of the leading countries in Europe to be a transatlanticist. You know, up until a couple of years ago, up until Donald Trump took the helm in the United States, that was a surefire way to achieve political office. I mean, in the sense that, you know, you get along with your best partners politically and also economically. But there's one thing we shouldn't forget. The ruling parties in both Germany and France and in the United Kingdom, which is not part of the EU, but still a big European power, they are currently extremely unpopular. We do not know what the German and European landscape will look like in 2 or 3 years if, say, in France, Le Pen, the far right, is elected. And then everything could change again.
Mm-hmm. Against that kind of like uncertainty, Joe Boy, you know, I think, you know, for the Chinese side, it's kind of hard, you know, to deal with those countries, because you met a leader today and then tomorrow or next year, you know, he or she would be gone, and you have to reestablish relationship, including personal relationship with that country, the leader of that country. But anyway, I think you know, economic ties has been the cornerstone, in a sense, of this bilateral relationship, isn't it? Until recently, we do have people see cooperation at the same time increasing, growing competition.
Yeah, you're definitely right, because if we look at the visits started by a French president, followed by British Prime Minister, and now German Chancellor, there is something in common. That is, they all came with large, delegations of, business people. So that's a priority, because I would consider now the relationship between China and the European countries have actually entered the second stage, because due to the first stage, all these countries would pressurize China to do more on the war in Ukraine. Of course, China tried, but this is not what they have expected, right? But now it seems that they are finally becoming realistic. Yeah, so they know now clearly, what China's position is, and they would shift toward economic cooperation. And this is really good for them, because you see, China is still world factory, but China is also now center of innovation. That is why more and more German companies actually are having joint research center in China, because in China things are simply done much faster than in Germany. Because if you want to manufacture a car, if it takes 4 years' time, then nobody wants a car once it comes out, right? You have to manage and to have it produced within 1 year and a half, and this can only be done in China.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor Bruckner, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And what's your understanding of the importance of the visit for Chancellor Merz?
Well, it is a very important moment, not only because the Chancellor travels for the first time to China, but it comes at a time when we face a number of very important geopolitical shifts. There is a very complicated relationship with the United States, and Merz has all his life served as a committed transatlanticist who now needs to learn that what he believed in is no longer true, and he has to reposition the country and to find pragmatic opportunities to guide Germany into a better future. On top of this, it's also a special relationship with the European Union, having a German in the driver's seat in the European Commission. So there's a lot to calibrate.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor, in terms of the economic and trade relationship, which is critically important for both countries, what's the expectation of the German side?
Well, Merz has always been a very committed pro-business politician, and he served more in the business world than he served as a politician when he lost against Merkel in the early 2000s. And now he can prove that he is the better pro-business chancellor. But the times in which he has to prove this are not ideal, to put it very diplomatic. So he has to show that a value-based foreign policy that was presented by the previous government doesn't lead us too much. He rather wants to be pragmatic. He showed this in his trip to the Gulf Cooperation country visits before, and also in the way he positions himself towards Trump. So there is a chance that it will lead to better relations with China. But as always, it takes two to tango, and it depends a lot on what China brings to the table.
Moritz, we know China is the largest trading partner of Germany. I mean, how important is the China market? And also, I would say, similarly, how important is the European market probably for Chinese products and services?
Extremely important. We've seen that Chinese factories have produced in certain regards overcapacity, and there's talk in the European Union of levering tariffs for example, electric cars, which cannot be produced at competitive prices within the European Union at the moment. And I have to say, because you asked this earlier, what could be done to change the trade surplus? What could be done is European companies would have to perform better. We'd have to export more competitive goods to the Chinese market. And this was one of the main points of contention between the US and the Europeans during Trump's first presidency, when he kept saying, we have this trade surplus, that's not fair. And the Europeans just kept saying, well, we have better products. If your customers, if Americans are buying these products, that's not unfair. That's competition. And if we speak about those three different characteristics that were defined in the former German government's China strategy: partner, competitor, systemic rival. I mean, being a competitor is something that the Europeans have always hailed as a mode of international engagement. So if we are at the other end of that stick now, then maybe we just have to shape up.
Professor Chun.
Yes.
You are shaking your head. So, do you agree that So some people say, in order to solve some of the, let's say, challenges between the relationship, partly economic, more competition from the Chinese side, and the trade deficit on the German side. There are complaints from the German side about I quote, like overcapacity, industrial policy, subsidy from the Chinese side. Of course, the Chinese side also had their own concern. For example, the restriction of Huawei technologies, 5G technology, and also ASMO's, the ban from Washington, of course, from selling necessary machines to produce advanced chips in China.
Yes.
If we are pointing finger at each other, we can never solve the problem, right?
Yeah. I think the problems are there. It's the new reality. It's a new normal. So it's very sad to see this new normal. But I think the two countries, the biggest economy in Europe, Germany, and China, the second largest economy in the world, should do further as in the past. That means in terms of pragmatism, not in terms of ideology or ideological confrontation. So as you said, overcapacity, for example, we take this word as example. It's a economic issue, or it's a geopolitical issue, or it's something between the two poles. So I think the two countries, the two or the politicians of the two sides should talk with each other as to find a common space in which the two economies can cooperate, can overcome the difficulties.
Mm-hmm. Well, one solution, Professor Bruckner, one solution suggested by some economists is like more Chinese investment in Germany, in European countries, so they can produce, for example, EVs and for local market. and then they can, even the talk of like a compulsory sharing of technologies with the European partners. Is that a possible solution?
Well, there are a lot of very simple, practical, case-by-case solutions that would improve the situation on both sides. But it's not a question of if something is ideological or not. This might have played a role in the past. But if we look at something like overcapacities, if the Chinese producer price index is falling in 41 consecutive months, it's a fact. It's not something where you look at it from a certain lens or from a certain angle. It's a fact, and it needs to be addressed. How it is addressed depends on who's looking at it. If we only look at it from an economic perspective and see what would be ideal to benefit as we benefited in the past from globalization, then things would be rather simple. But in times in which everything is securitized and in times in which the transatlantic relation is no longer what it is, there are also people looking at relations from the perspective of, does it cause an asymmetric dependency? And then the security people will say, economically it's beneficial, from a security standpoint it's not. And the poor chancellor has to balance the conflicting positions that are not ideological, but they just follow different rationales. This is the tricky thing, and it's not only applying to the German side or the European side, it also applies to the Chinese side, because we both face problems that define what is presented as a national interest.
Interesting point there. Professor Broken, at the same time, we know that the European Union is expected to present a paper, but it was delayed. They call it like reindustrialization of the European economy. A major element of that is made in Europe. Like thresholds. For example, EVs, 70% must be produced locally. And of course, related requirements of Windows, for example. How do you look at that? Is that the rise of protectionism or barriers to be built by the European Union to protect themselves against, against the US, against the Chinese?
Well, I wouldn't look at it from the perspective of trade policy or trade theory and call it a protectionist instrument, because the motivation is not to keep other countries out from European Union markets. As I said, we both became rich by organizing a system of globalization that uses the comparative advantages of very different economies. And we will continue to benefit greatly if we continue optimizing our different comparative advantages. What is different now is that so many dependencies have been instrumentalized in one way or the other, that the painful lesson that there are asymmetric dependencies with energy from Russia, with security from the United States, rare earth from China, and a number of other examples make partners so vulnerable that they have to de-risk. And therefore, everyone is trying to bring systemic production home, or at least reduce the level of dependency in case things become complicated, not because it makes economically no sense, but it is politicized and used as a weapon, which we haven't done in the past.
Joe, what do you make of that? And that's a reality to a certain degree, right? Chancellor Merz talked about at the Munich Security Conference of over-reliance, of relying on China too much, rare earth elements in particular. How do you look at this reliance? Chinese people to say, the Chinese products rely on the European market, probably, or rely on the U.S., at least in the past, too much, so the U.S. can impose tariff on you. From globalization, mutual dependence, but now it's like everybody is taking care of their own interests somehow, or securitizing what should be normal trade.
Well, I'm not an economist, so I really don't know whether Germany relies too heavily on China or not. But but I often hear a complaint about how trading between China and the respective country is out of balance. That is true. because China is the largest trading partner to about 150 countries and regions. So the complaints are more or less the same, right? But I think economically speaking, the basic common sense is that if you want me to buy something from you, that must be something that I really want, right? Because this is the basis of bilateral trading. So I have read an article actually from Financial Times complaining that Europe basically has nothing that China really wants to buy. Yeah, so that becomes a problem. But that certainly is not our problem, right? So you should, as other panelists have pointed out, increase your competitiveness and find out what is really needed in Chinese market.
Yes. Professor Brook, now, of course, what's your response here? I think, China is not only producing, say, like EVs, like other products, kind of similar to what produced in Germany, but probably at a lower price. At the same time, China is a center of innovation, AI, for example, and other related technology. In a sense, I think China is ahead of Germany, to be fair. How should the German industry, German companies do probably to catch up or to compete with the Chinese side?
Well, this is another perfect example that things are not just either technological or a source of innovation or a source of generating growth, but it's also a major challenge to our social models and to the question of what is the role of humans in an economic system. Because there are so many inbuilt risks of forming with forms of discrimination and other forms of creating a reality that we cannot distinguish from empirical facts, that the speed of transformation in an AI-driven economy and the risks that it comes with are perceived in very different ways. For those who want to control everything, AI is a totalitarian dream comes true. For an American perspective, it's just another form of generating money. But this also comes with so much power for giant corporations that they become powerful players in a global economy that often are more powerful than states. While the European Union claims that their use of AI and their forms of regulation is to serve people. So we have very different perspectives in what to do with technological innovation, and that leads to a lot of clashes that have very little to do with what engineers have to say or what business people look at when they try to measure the economic potential of AI-driven innovations.
Chun, final words. What's the prospect of the relationship?
How do you mean relationship between the two economies or between
Germany and China, like overall countries? Relationship?
I'm somehow optimistic, only somehow, because I think the two countries or the two nations, the peoples, are very pragmatical and very consensus-oriented, from the traditions of the two cultures. So I think the Germans and Chinese or the people would identify a somehow consensus in terms of economical cooperation. I think so.
Yeah, let's hope that will be the result, and we'll continue the cooperation and even strengthen our cooperation between the two countries. With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.